The Arrival Ambassador. Jason Foster's shuttle descended onto the polished landing pad of the Hadar Palace, its engines humming a soft note of tension that matched the mood of the day. The vast structure was a monument to alien opulence, with towering columns of iridescent alloys and a crystalline ceiling that reflected the twin suns into a cascade of colors. Foster stepped out, his face a mask of diplomatic calm, though his heart pounded with the weight of the mission. Perched on his shoulder was Zephyr, a small ferret with beady, intelligent eyes that took in the grandeur of the alien palace with curious, darting glances. The Hadar Honor Guard stood stiffly at attention, their PL-asthma rifles held with disciplined precision, though their expressions betrayed a mixture of disdain and suspicion. To them, the sight of a human diplomat was irritating enough, but the presence of what they perceived as a pet was nothing short of an insult. As Foster approached the grand reception hall, alien eyes followed him, a mix of curiosity, hostility, and a begrudging respect for the human delegation that had survived decades of war. The Galactic War had ravaged both human and Hadar civilizations, bringing them to the brink of collapse. This summit, a last-ditch effort for peace, was fraught with mistrust and old wounds. Yet, amidst the tension, it was Zephyr who seemed to draw the most attention. The Hadar, warriors to their core, saw the idea of pets as a frivolous indulgence. That a human would bring such a creature into the heart of their empire spoke volumes about their audacity. The tension rises as the delegation entered the grand hall. The atmosphere was electric with unspoken threats and thinly veiled contempt. The Hadar High Council, seated on their elevated thrones, made no effort to hide their disdain for the humans. They viewed humanity's achievements as those of upstart savages, barely scraping the surface of true galactic power. Ambassador Foster, maintaining a stoic expression, began the delicate dance of diplomacy, his words measured and precise, but inwardly he was all too aware of the fragility of the situation. One wrong word, one misstep, and the precarious peace would shatter, plunging both species back into a war neither could afford. Zephyr, sensing the tension, remained still on Foster's shoulder, its small form almost blending into the human's uniform. But then, in a moment of startling clarity, the ferret moved. With a blur of dusky fur, Zephyr leapt from Foster's shoulder, darting across the floor of the grand hall. Gasps and snarls erupted from the assembled Hadar, their eyes wide with shock and confusion, as the tiny creature bounded straight towards an ancient blast door, secured with a cryptic locking mechanism that had confounded even the brightest Hadar minds for generations. The hall fell into stunned silence as Zephyr, with a few deft movements of its tiny paws, unraveled the ancient puzzle, the door groaning open to reveal a treasure trove of hyper-advanced technology, relics of a long-dead civilization. Zephyr's secret. The revelation sent a shockwave through the Hadar leadership. Some saw Zephyr's feat as proof of humanity's cunning, an existential threat that needed to be eradicated before it could subsume the galaxy. Others, however, saw in the ferret's actions a glimmer of hope, a potential key to ending the war and saving their species from oblivion. The High Council erupted into chaos, factions forming and dissolving in the blink of an eye as brother turned against brother. The summit, intended to be a step toward peace, devolved into a cacophony of conflicting agendas and ancient grudges. In the eye of this diplomatic storm stood Ambassador Foster, the fate of not just his people, but potentially the entire galaxy resting on his next words and actions. As the tension reached a fever pitch, Foster did the only thing he could think of. He scooped up Zephyr, cradling the ferret protectively against his chest as he backed slowly towards the exit. His eyes never left the snarling Hadar counselors, ready to defend himself if necessary. Just as it seemed violence would erupt, a towering figure in ornate armor stepped forward from the shadows. It was General Linu, the most respected warrior in the Empire, his very presence enough to give the enraged aliens pause. "Ambassador," Linu growled, his gravelly voice echoing through the chamber, "come with me if you want to live." Without waiting for a response, Foster nodded and fell in behind the general, Zephyr still clutched tightly to his chest. The escaped General Lenu led them swiftly through the labyrinthine halls of the palace, the distant shouts and clatter of armored feet telling Foster that their absence had been noticed. The grand halls and crystalline ceilings gave way to narrow corridors and dimly lit passageways, the opulence of the palace quickly fading into the utilitarian design of its lower levels. Finally, they reached a nondescript service door, which Lenu opened with a swift code entry, revealing a narrow alleyway strewn with rubble and detritus. The once proud capital had been ravaged by orbital bombardment, its former grandeur now lying in ruins. They picked their way through the debris, flinching as the occasional plasma bolt sizzled overhead or struck a crumbling wall nearby. It was clear that someone had deployed hunter-seeker drones, and it was only a matter of time before they were spotted. Just as their luck seemed to run out, Lenu ducked into a hidden tunnel entrance concealed beneath a collapsed hovercar. Foster and Zephyr followed close behind, plunging into the musty darkness that swallowed them whole. They emerged in a dimly lit underground chamber, crowded with ragged Jim-Hadar civilians and soldiers bearing the scars of battle. A makeshift command center had been erected in the center of the room, with a large holographic map displaying what appeared to be a network of tunnels crisscrossing the city. "Welcome to the Resistance," General Lenu said, his eyes glinting with a fierce determination. "We've been fighting the Overseer's tyranny for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. With you and your little friend," he gestured to Zephyr. "That moment may have finally come." The Resistance. In the Resistance's hidden base, Foster was introduced to Dr. Talon, a tall, slender Jim-Hadar female with cybernetic lenses that glowed softly as she studied Zephyr with intense curiosity. Talon was the Resistance's resident expert on ancient technology, and she had been studying the relics that Zephyr had so effortlessly unlocked back at the palace. As they gathered around the holographic map, Dr. Talon explained her theory. The artifacts scattered across the planet were part of a larger network, each piece building upon the next to unlock a power that could reshape the very fabric of reality. "But to make it work," she said, her voice layered with harmonics, "we need the other artifacts, and Zephyr's skills to activate them." Foster studied the display, the gravity of their situation settling on his shoulders like a leaden weight. The destiny of the universe hung in the balance, and somehow his pet ferret had become the fulcrum upon which it would turn. It was almost too absurd to believe, yet the evidence was irrefutable. They planned their strike on the Jim-Hadar military's research complex, where the remaining artifacts were kept under lock and key. The pre-dawn darkness cloaked their approach to the facility, with General Lenu leading the way, his massive form blending surprisingly well with the shadows. Foster followed close behind, Zephyr perched on his shoulder while Dr. Talon brought up the rear, her scanner constantly sweeping for threats. They infiltrated deeper into the compound, slipping past the outer perimeter with ease, thanks to Lenu's inside knowledge and a few well-placed EMP charges. Yet, as they reached the central laboratory, Foster couldn't shake the feeling that this was all too easy. His suspicions were confirmed when the doors slid open without resistance, revealing a cavernous chamber filled with humming machinery and pulsing energy conduits. The Battle At. The center of the laboratory stood a cylindrical pod, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as Foster watched. "There," Talon whispered, pointing to the pod. "That's the artifact we're here for." But before they could approach, Zephyr leapt from Foster's shoulder, darting across the floor with preternatural speed. The ferret scampered up a bank of computers, its tiny paws dancing across the keys. Suddenly, a hidden panel in the far wall slid open, revealing a second chamber beyond. "By the first egg," Lenu breathed, his eyes wide. "How did we miss that?" They entered the hidden room cautiously, weapons at the ready. What they found inside defied explanation. Another stasis pod, far larger than the first, dominated the space. Its surface was clouded with frost, but through the haze, Foster could make out a humanoid figure within. Zephyr chirped excitedly, scampering up to the pod's control panel. Before anyone could stop him, the ferret's paws flew across the interface. With a hiss of escaping gases, the pod began to open. "Get back!" Lenu barked, raising his weapon. But Foster found himself rooted to the spot, transfixed by the sight before him. The figure within stirred, then sat up abruptly. He was clearly not Jim Hadar. His skin was a mottled green, with 4 eyes that blinked in rapid succession as they adjusted to the light. When he spoke, his voice was rough from disuse but carried an undeniable authority. "I am Javik, last of the Protheans," he declared, climbing unsteadily from the pod. "And you have awakened me none too soon." Foster's mind reeled. The Protheans were thought to be nothing more than legend, a long-extinct race whispered about in the dusty corners of archaeological digs. Yet here one stood before them, as real as the cold metal floor beneath his feet. Havik's gaze swept over the assembled group, lingering on Zephyr. "Your companion," he said, addressing Foster directly. "It is more than it appears." The final stand before Foster could respond, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. Linu cursed, readying his weapon. "We've overstayed our welcome," he growled. "Time to go." As they raced through the corridors, dodging plasma bolts and security drones, Havik filled them in on the true nature of the artifacts they sought. "They are components of a weapon," he explained between breaths, "designed to combat a threat that returns every 50,000 years to harvest all advanced life in the galaxy." They burst out of the facility into the harsh light of dawn, only to find themselves surrounded by Jim Hadar troops. As Foster raised his hands in surrender, his mind churned with the implications of Havik's words. The galactic war suddenly seemed trivial in comparison to the cosmic horror that loomed on the horizon. Zephyr chittered nervously on his shoulder, and Foster felt a strange sensation brush against his mind, a presence that was alien yet familiar. He glanced at the ferret, their eyes meeting for a brief, electric moment. In that instant, Foster understood that their journey had only just begun, and that the fate of the stars rested on far more than just human ingenuity. The Jim Hadar troops closed in, their weapons trained on the small group. But just as it seemed all hope was lost, a series of explosions rocked the facility behind them. In the ensuing chaos, Linu seized the opportunity. "No!" he roared, unleashing a barrage of suppressing fire. Foster grabbed Zephyr and sprinted for cover, feeling the heat of plasma bolts sizzling past. Dr. Talon and Javik followed close behind, the Prothean moving with surprising agility despite his recent awakening. They zigzagged through the rubble-strewn streets, ducking into alleys and abandoned buildings. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter as they delved deeper into the war-torn city. After what felt like hours of frantic evasion, they finally reached a nondescript entrance hidden beneath a collapsed overpass. Linu punched in a code, and a section of the ground slid away, revealing a narrow passage. "In, quickly," he urged, ushering them inside. The tunnel led to a cavernous underground chamber, bustling with activity. Resistance fighters moved purposefully among banks of computers and makeshift medical stations. Foster's relief at their escape was short-lived, however, as Linu suddenly stumbled and collapsed. "Medic!" Talon shouted, kneeling beside the fallen general. A closer look revealed a plasma burn on his side, hidden by his armor. As Linu was rushed to the medical bay, Foster turned to Javik and Talon. "What now?" he asked, absently stroking Zephyr's fur. Dr. Talon's cybernetic lenses whirred as she considered their options. "We need to act fast," she said. "The Overseer won't stop until we're eliminated. Our best chance is to expose their treachery to the High Council." Havik nodded gravely. "Agreed. But penetrating the palace defenses will not be easy." Talon's eyes gleamed with a spark of inspiration. "Not necessarily. The palace still uses an ancient security system, one that Zephyr might be able to bypass." Foster looked down at the ferret perched on his shoulder. Zephyr chittered as if accepting the challenge. "All right," Foster said. "Let's hear this plan of yours." The plan unfolds hours later. They crept through the shadows of the royal palace, the tension thick in the air. Foster's heart pounded as he watched Zephyr scamper up to a control panel, its tiny paws dancing across the interface with remarkable precision. With a soft beep, the door slid open, revealing the inner sanctum of the Jim Hadar leadership. "Incredible," Havik murmured, his 4 eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene. They had barely taken 2 steps inside when a shout rang out, echoing through the marble corridors. "Intruders!" A squad of elite guards rounded the corner, their plasma rifles already blazing. Foster dove for cover as Havok unleashed a biotic assault, hurling the guards back with a wave of kinetic energy. In the chaos, Talon managed to hack into a nearby terminal, her fingers flying over the alien keyboard. "This way," she called, revealing a hidden passage behind a tapestry. They raced through the narrow corridors, the sounds of pursuit growing closer with every step. Suddenly, Havok stumbled, clutching his side where green blood seeped through his fingers. "Go!" he growled, turning to face their pursuers. "I will hold them off." Foster hesitated, but Talon pulled him onward. "We have to reach the council chambers," she insisted. They burst into the grand hall, startling the assembled councilors. Chancellor Krax rose from his seat, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the human diplomat and his alien allies. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. The revelation Foster stepped forward, Zephyr still at his side. "We have evidence of the Overseer's betrayal," he declared, activating a holographic projector. Images flickered to life, showing the Overseer conspiring with shadowy figures, sabotaging Jim Hadar defenses. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the chamber. "Lies!" a counselor shouted. "Human deceptions!" But before the argument could escalate, Zephyr leapt onto the central dais, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Suddenly, Foster felt a wave of alien memories wash over him, and from the gasps around the room, he knew the counselors were experiencing the same thing. When it ended, the chamber erupted into chaos. Chancellor Krax's voice cut through the din. "I've seen enough. The Overseer must be stopped!" But others were not so easily convinced. "Traitor!" someone shouted. Weapons were drawn, and the council chamber devolved into a battleground. Amidst the fighting, a cold voice echoed through the air. "Well done, Ambassador. You've sown discord among my people." Foster turned to see a towering figure materialize before them. The Overseer's form shifted and warped, revealing its true monstrous nature. Psychic energy crackled around it, and Foster felt an overwhelming pressure against his mind. But Zephyr stood firm, unaffected by the Overseer's power. The ferret's eyes blazed with defiance as it faced the ancient threat. Foster gripped his weapon, knowing the real battle had only just begun. The final confrontation. The council chamber erupted into a violent melee as plasma bolts and biotic blasts crisscrossed the air. Foster ducked behind an overturned table, Zephyr clinging to his shoulder, its tiny body vibrating with tension. "We need to move!" Talon shouted over the din, her cybernetic eye whirring as she analyzed escape routes. Foster nodded, scanning the room through the haze of weapons fire. He spotted a small door partially hidden behind a tapestry. "There!" he yelled, pointing. They made a dash for it, zigzagging to avoid the crossfire. As they reached the door, Foster felt a searing pain in his leg. He stumbled, nearly falling, but Talon caught his arm and hauled him through the opening. They found themselves in a narrow corridor, the sounds of battle muffled behind them. Talon sealed the door, buying them precious seconds. "This way," she urged, supporting Foster as they limped down the passageway. The corridor opened into a vast network of catacombs, the air thick with the musty scent of ages past. As they ventured deeper, the echoes of conflict above grew fainter. Suddenly, footsteps approached from a branching tunnel. Foster raised his weapon, but Talon pushed it down. "Wait," she whispered. A group of Jim Hadar emerged, led by a familiar face. "Chancellor Krax!" The Chancellor's eyes widened in recognition. "Ambassador Foster," he said, lowering his weapon. "It seems we find ourselves on the same side." Foster nodded wearily. "The Overseer is a traitor to our people," Krax finished. "We've seen the evidence. My loyalists and I barely escaped the coup." A young female Jim Hadar stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Zephyr. "Father," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "The small creature. It speaks to me." The decision Krax looked at his daughter in surprise. "Thraxa, what do you mean?" Foster watched in amazement as Zephyr leapt from his shoulder to Thraxa's outstretched hand. The ferret chittered softly, its eyes locked with the young Jim Hadar's. I can see its thoughts," Thraxa murmured. "It's not just an animal, it's more." Foster exchanged a glance with Talon. "We have much to discuss, Chancellor," he said. "But first we need to find a safe place to regroup." Krax nodded. "We have a hidden bunker not far from here. Follow me." As they made their way through the winding catacombs, Foster's mind raced. The revelation of Zephyr's true nature, the chaos above, and the looming threat of the Overseer all swirled together in a dizzying maelstrom. They reached the bunker, a well-stocked command center hidden deep beneath the city. As Talon tended to Foster's wound, he outlined his plan to unite the various factions against the Overseer. "It's ambitious," Cracks admitted, "but it may be our only hope." Using the bunker's advanced communications array, they sent out a call to arms, Dr. Talon's resistance cell, other sympathetic alien races, even human colonies that had remained neutral in the war. All were contacted. Days passed in a blur of strategy meetings and intense waiting. Thraxa and Zephyr spent hours together, their bond growing stronger. Through their connection, Foster learned more about the ferret's origins and capabilities than he ever thought possible. Finally, a breakthrough came. Using Zephyr's newly revealed abilities, they located Javik and the injured Linu. A daring rescue mission brought them to the bunker, where Javik confirmed their worst fears. "The Overseer is but a vanguard," the Prothean said gravely. "Its kind seeks to harvest all advanced life in the galaxy. We've faced them before and nearly perished." The final battle. With this knowledge, the urgency of their mission became clear. As representatives from other worlds began to arrive, Foster found himself at the center of an unprecedented alliance. In the midst of coordinating their united forces, Zephyr suddenly began chittering frantically. The ferret led Foster to a forgotten terminal, its paws flying over the keys. "By the first egg," Cracks breathed, staring at the decrypted data. "The Overseer's next target." Foster's blood ran cold as he read the information, a pre-warp civilization defenseless against the coming storm. "If the Overseer succeeds there, we need to move," Foster said, his voice hard with purpose. "Now!" As their hastily assembled fleet prepared to jump, Foster stood on the bridge of the lead ship. Zephyr perched on his shoulder. The weight of countless lives pressed down on him, but he felt a glimmer of hope. They emerged from hyperspace to find the Overseer's forces already descending on the helpless world. Foster's voice rang out across the comms, coordinating their multi-pronged assault. "Zephyr now!" he commanded. The ferret's eyes glowed with an otherworldly light as it projected a psychic shield around the planet's inhabitants. On the display, Foster watched as their ships engaged the enemy, while on the ground, strike teams led by Javik and Linu fought to push back the invaders. The battle had only just begun, but Foster knew that here, in this moment, they were making a stand. Not just for one world, but for the future of the entire galaxy. The aftermath, the battle raged on, a cacophony of plasma fire and energy beams lighting up the void of space. Foster's voice rang out over the comms, coordinating the Allied fleet's assault on the Overseer's vanguard forces. Zephyr's eyes glowed with ethereal light as it maintained the psychic shield around the planet's inhabitants. For a moment, it seemed their strategy was working. But then, without warning, Zephyr's shield flickered and vanished. Foster's heart sank as he watched the Overseer's forces descend upon the defenseless world. "No!" he shouted, slamming his fist on the console. In that instant, Zephyr leapt from his shoulder. The ferret's form blurred, and then it was gone, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air.